Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap
Gaga
it,
and
tap
Grumps
it.
has entered the grotto.
Warm-up routine. Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene. Gang gremlins on the scene.
Grumps has entered the grotto.
Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it. Gang gremlins coming, let's go. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen.
Libs has entered the grotto.
Now tap that screen.
We would be honored if you would
Now
join
tap that screen. Gang gremlins on the scene. Welcome gremlins to the game grotto. Welcome gremlins to the game grotto. Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Gang gremlins on the scene. 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 Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Gang gremlins coming, let's go. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen.
Gaga and Grumps has entered the grotto. Grumps says it lives
Now
high.
tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says hi Libs, how goes it?
Grumps has entered the grotto.
Aspara says happy Friday Gaga and Grumps.
Gang gremlins on the scene.
Libs has entered the grotto. Grumps says it Ispara higher.
Gaga Grumps says you to
Ispara has
Ispara.
entered the grotto.
Aspara says Gaga, can we get a fresh nail reveal?
Aspara says very nice.
Gaga Grumps says skulls and skeletons. Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
We would be honored
Gaga Grumps
if you
says
would
thank
join
you.
us.
Joan has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says okay, let's get the first game rolling. Gaga Grumps says hi OJ City, welcome.
Isabella has entered the grotto.
Isabella says hello.
Aspara says woo.
Gaga Grumps says hi Isabella. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Aspara says, I'm gonna say V.
Isabella says I'm gonna say her.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. H.
Isabella says a WW.
Grumps says it's Sonia Princess Shanice hi.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Liverpool, a magic has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says thanks for following Liverpool. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with H please libs.
Isabella says whoever is first, if it's me, do Harry.
Gaga Grumps says house you got.
Isabella says house is a good one.
Dan has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says you aren't in the Vassable for Isabella. Gaga Grumps says we have a green O living at number 2, and the yellow E in need of a home.
Mingo has entered the grotto.
Isabella says lover.
Gaga Grumps says lover fits.
Isabella says rover.
Gaga Grumps says E lives at number 4.
Isabella says Coper.
Isabella says NVM.
Isabella says ye poked is good.
Gaga Grumps says poked works. Gaga Grumps says K lives at number 3.
Isabella says coke it.
Aspara says, could we have woken up?
Isabella says token I mean autocorrect.
Gaga Grumps says I don't think coke it is. Work.
Aspara says HMM.
Aspara says token sounds good. Gaga,
Poppy Heart
trust
Hands has
your
entered
gut.
the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says token is a better shout than woken, I think.
Poppy says women. Isabella says yeah, I mean token it was autocorrect somehow.
Isabella says woken.
Catalina Wing has entered the grotto.
Catalina 999 says woken.
Roxy has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says yep, it must be, I don't see anything else.
Roxy says women.
Riot Sheets has entered the grotto.
Roxy says woken.
Gaga Grumps says can't be women. Roxy.
We would be
Late
honored
May, number 3.
if you would join us.
R Upsilon KI has entered the grotto.
Roxy says that Gaga and Grumps. I meant to put woken.
Gaga is in the box. Aspara says rules. Grumps is on the buttons.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Let those stickers fly.
Aspara says W.
Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer.
Good game. Good game. Good game. Good game. Good game.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for the roses, Liverpool. Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily half, Isabella. Gaga Grumps says grab your daily half while I set up the next one. Gaga Grumps says thanks for following Roxy. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Espara says B.
Summer has entered the grotto.
Isabella says R.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. S. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard
Hugo
reset
has entered the
incoming.
grotto.
Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
We would be honored.
Hugo says
if you would
super.
join
Jay has
us.
entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says Shy is in our house.
We would be
Man has
honored
entered the
Grumps
grotto.
says,
if you would
now
join us.
let's see your fingers dance.
Shay says afternoon spawn point.
A man says hi all.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily hearts, Shy and Man. Gaga Grumps says hi Summer, didn't see you come in. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with S please Summer.
Liverpool, our magic says it. Gaga and Grumps.
Isabella says at Gaga and Grumps, you know how yesterday we down who had the most coins. And you know how Emily won.
Summer says at Gaga and Grumps hey.
Gaga Grumps says most coins.
Isabella says I mean hearts.
Gaga Grumps says solar you got. Gaga Grumps says yes I do it every game. Liverpool the magic says that don't worry system. Gaga Grumps says we have a Greeno living at number 2.
Isabella says I was first
Lila
because
has
I
entered
had
the grotto.
2,000 hearts and he had 1,000.
Lila says words.
Summer says found.
Summer says at Lila no R. Gaga Grumps says I reset the leaderboard every race. It's that list by my face that decides first word.
MAM says wound.
Gaga Grumps says found fits.
Isabella says that Gaga and Grumps are okay.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow N in need
HOOFY
of a
Goober
home.
has entered the grotto.
Hoofy Doofy Goober says count.
Hoofy Doofy Goober says count.
Hoofy Doofy Goober says count. Summer says that Hoofy Doofy Goober no UN innocent at the third spot.
Chapman
Gaga
has entered the
Grumps says
grotto.
the middle words popping up keep count of your total likes. But the leaderboard is specific to each race.
Chapman says noise.
Isabella says noise.
Summer says at Chapman, no S. Chapman says noise.
Gaga Grumps says no S for noise.
Isabella says noise.
Gaga Grumps says I think noise is just Brooklyn 99, isn't it lol?
MAM says bonus.
Gaga Grumps says yeah, it's not a valid word. Gaga Grumps says no U or S.
MAM says bones.
Gamer Boy has entered the grotto.
Gamer Boy says young.
Isabella says bonus is really good, but no U or S.
Chapman says bonds. Mom says honey.
Chapman says honey. Gaga Grumps says bonds fits.
Gamer Boy says bounce.
Swapsy has entered the grotto. Swapsy says notch.
Gaga Grumps says we added a homeless E.
Chapman says money.
Gamer Boy says poems.
MAM says honey.
Isabella says Noman.
Swapsy says woven.
Chapman says notch.
Swapsy says woven fits.
Gamer Boy says women.
Chapman says notch.
Gaga Grumps says are we in a token woken
ARLETTE has entered the grotto.
ARLETTE says token.
Isabella says Noman.
Noah B has
Gamer
entered
Boy
the grotto.
says women.
Isabella says women.
Gaga Grumps says did I accidentally click the same game lol? Gaga Grumps says what? Gaga Grumps says no. Gaga Grumps says but it's the only option. Gaga Grumps says this I have to check.
MAM says catch you later.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
A random star chosen by fate. Play your part, it's a live date. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. Ra-da-da. A Wordle with Gaga. Get it in 3. It's do or die. Only in 3. A pretty sky.
Gaga Grumps says it was the same game roll.
A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. Da-da-da. A Wordle with Gaga. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Gaga Grumps says it didn't mark the game off as completed. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. S.
Cupcake has entered the grotto. Cupcake has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word. Gaga Grumps says hi Cupcake, thanks for following your daily heart.
Victorious
Cupcake
Hamster has
says
entered
good
the grotto.
evening to you both.
Grumps says it Cupcake higher.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
User has entered the grotto.
User 82,648,266 says spang.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with S please summer.
User 80,648,266 says Spain.
Gaga Grumps says hi user, summer won this word.
Summer says me.
Gaga Grumps says no sorry, cupcake.
User 82,648,266 says HIA babies.
Gaga Grumps says cupcake it's your word sorry.
Cupcake says scene.
Thomas has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says scene you got.
Kumo has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow E in need of a home. Gaga Grumps says hi Thomas welcome back. Gaga Grumps says nope no see.
Victoria says empty.
Gaga Grumps says empty fits.
Millar has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says a green M moved into 2 Wordle Street. Gaga Grumps says hi Mila.
Millar says hi.
Cupcake says image.
Gaga Grumps says image fits. Gaga Grumps says added an A in need of a home.
Victoria says ample.
Cupcake says amber.
Gaga Grumps says no P.
Too Many Oats has
Too
entered the
Many
grotto.
Oats says amber.
Gaga Grumps says amber would be my choice, yes.
Victorious says sorry.
Timaniot says yay.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round.
Gaga Grumps says welcome Gremlins to the game grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to play.
Gang Gremlins on the scene. 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 Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Gang Gremlins, come and let's go. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says Q, of course.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. M. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top. Like a thon, tap and don't stop. Like a thon.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Gremlin renowned like a thon. Fingers on fire like a thon. Gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts beat flying like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says you crashed the first light goal you rocked. Gaga Grumps says thanks for the Go Pop cupcake. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with M please cupcake.
Dagoartidi has entered the grotto.
Dagoat86.7 says, hi, I might have to leave the live because I have to go somewhere.
Cupcake says mixed.
Gaga Grumps says okay Dagoart, thanks for popping in though. Gaga Grumps says mixed you go.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No letters to shout.
Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
Lost in the grid, can't figure it out.
Dagoat86.7 says pluck.
RSA has entered the grotto.
RSA says hello, Lady Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says hi RSA lol. Gaga Grumps says pluck fits.
RSA says THX.
Has entered the grotto.
It's James, says it's Racer.
It's James says it's Racer.
Dagoat8067 says don't spoil it.
Gaga Grumps says a green U lives at number 3 Wordle Street. It's James says NVM. RSA says smut. Gaga Grumps says we don't play the daily Wordle in here, only the archive. Gaga Grumps says can't be smuck.
Cupcake says tough.
Gaga Grumps says tough fits.
Dagoat8067 says tough is a good shout.
Gaga Grumps says O moved into number 2, T needs a home.
RSA says rude.
Gaga Grumps says we need a filter word using as many of those consonants as possible. Gaga Grumps says it won't be plural.
The goat 86-7 says swear.
Gaga Grumps says I think it's sound. Gaga Grumps says Thomas it won't be plural.
Gaga 67 says that Thomas there's no B.
RSA says bound.
Thanks for the follow.
Goat 86-7 says at RSA no B.
RSA says sound.
Gaga Grumps says we have an S.
Goat 86-7 says at LIBS it doesn't have E in it.
Gaga Grumps says it does. There's a yellow T in guess 3. Gaga Grumps says libs it needs an S.
Dagoat 8067 says I want to see if Faust is a word.
Gaga Grumps says no it isn't lol.
Goat 8067 says okay.
Gaga Grumps says snout or stout.
Dogodity67 says at Gaga and Grumps can't be because the O needs to be second and U needs to be third.
Gaga Grumps says yep seen it.
Alyssa has entered the grotto.
Alyssa says joust.
Gaga Grumps says ha saw it at the same time Alyssa. Gaga Grumps says and welcome.
Cupcake says well done.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the box! Don't let her loose! Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him
Gaga
push
Grumps
yours!
says tile 1 was a job of
Ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you
Top Goat 86.7 says, by Gaga, I have to go see you later.
Gaga Grumps says not helped by my brainstorm. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Grump says at Daggerart_87 have a good evening. Grump says at Tom's higher.
Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Z. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Grump says at Regan hello.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat flying, like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says second light goal smashed, awesome work.
Grump says at Tokaboka Girl high.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Z please Grumps.
Grump says at Sab selling legit high, welcome back. Grump says ZOINK.
Gaga Grumps says
Sab selling legit has entered the grotto.
Sab selling legit says hello.
Grump says at Jane high.
Gaga Grumps says zoink you got.
Grumps says failing that. Zebra.
Gaga Grumps says no valid.
Grumps says at Paul Wilkes High.
Gaga Grumps says Ian are in need of homes. Gaga Grumps says are not a. Gaga Grumps says do zebras have tripes ha ha ha.
Grumps says outer.
Gaga Grumps says we have a dreaded word.
Emma has entered the grotto.
Emma says minor.
Gaga Grumps says minor fits. Hi Emma.
Sabsalinglegit says at Emma Goodwin.
Emma says hi.
Gaga Grumps says I and then in need of homes.
Emma says infer.
Gaga Grumps says I think it's infer. Gaga Grumps says agreed. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Good game. Good game. Good game. Good game.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board.
It's do or die, only in three. A pretty sky. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. Da da da. A Wordle with Gaga. Ra, ra, da, da.
Gaga Grumps says, what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. E. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song
Evie has
chooses
entered the
first
grotto.
word.
Evie says event.
Race to the top like a thon. Tap and don't stop like a thon. Who will be crowned like
Gaga Grumps says hi Evie.
renowned like a thon. Fingers on fire like a thon. Gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts be flying like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says want the word tap tap tap. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with E please libs. Gaga Grumps says event you got.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No
Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
NUFC Life has entered the grotto.
C for LIFE says flare.
Luna SICILY has entered the grotto.
Sicily says forum.
NUFC for LIFE says flare.
Gaga Grumps says hi NUFC welcome back. Gaga Grumps says flare fits.
NUFC for life says at Gaga and Grumps, what's up, how are you?
Gaga Grumps says good tar. Gaga Grumps says green A and I at 3 and 4 are in need of S home.
Luna Sicily says Braille.
Luna Sicily says Brame.
Gaga Grumps says no N.
NUFC for LIFE says braid.
Gaga grumps says but braid would work.
Luna Sicily says braid.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance and explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy place. Fireworks for
Gaga grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
Emojis make her happy, as in her face is happy. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga.
Grump says it's got high.
Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga grumps says GG gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga grumps says we are starting with A, D. Gaga grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon.
Gaga grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Be flying like a thon. Gremlins define. Lights the fire. Lights the fire. Lights the fire.
Gaga grumps says your word starting with D please NUFC.
NUFC for LIFE says drain please.
Gaga grumps says drain you got. Gaga Grumps says a yellow N in need of a home.
In UFC for life says Snows.
NUFC for life says Snows fits.
Gaga Grumps says won't be plural. How about snowy?
NUFC for life says yeah.
Gaga Grumps says N lives at number 2 and O moved in next door. Gaga Grumps says I want it to be known lol.
NUFC for LIFE says it will be.
Gaga Grumps says no.
Fireball has entered the grotto.
Fireball says he. How are you?
Gaga Grumps says hey Fireball. Good, you.
Fireball says I just got off of work ready to play this game with you.
Fireball says do you like donuts?
Gaga Grumps says awesome. Kumo says hi guys, how are you? Gaga Grumps says hey Kumo.
Fireball says here you go.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for the donuts nom nom.
Fireball says lol.
Gaga Grumps says now should I spin knock?
Fireball says sure why not.
Kumo says look at the likes guy, I'm helping so much.
In UFC for LIF he says him helping more.
Fireball says nice.
And UFC for LAF, he says now you are.
Gaga Grumps says wow, you the one person like Gold Kumo amazing.
Kumo says are you sure? Kumo says sure.
Fireball says elegy next word. And UFC for LAF, he says at Kumo we cooking.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next ball. Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Gaga Grumps says then thanks for doing your heart me. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fireball says here we go.
Kumo says IGNGC y'all later.
Claire Alice has entered
Claire
the grotto.
Ellis says good evening everyone.
Gaga Grumps says come back soon Kuma.
Grumps says at Claire Alice higher.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Why?
Fireball says Aegis.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Grumps says at Kumo later.
Claire Ellis says at Grumps hi. Hope you're well.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Fireball says, but why isn't in the word?
Gaga Grumps says we don't know that fireball. It's not today's Wordle. Fireball says what?
Has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Y please NUFC.
Fireball says why would appear green or yellow if it is in the word.
Gaga Grumps says I record myself doing the daily Wordle before I go live.
Hopehead says happy Friday.
Has entered the grotto.
Lex Ariaby says young.
Fireball says, what does that mean?
And UFC for LIFE says, I don't know, I can't think.
Gaga Grumps says we haven't done a word yet to know what color the Y is.
Join us.
NUFC for life says Yule.
Fireball says youth.
Gaga Grumps says Yule is a contraction, not a word. NUFC for LIFE says yeah, youth. Gaga Grumps says youth you got.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No letters to shout.
Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
Hopic says cry.
Lost in the grid, can't figure
Lexi Iriaby says snail.
NUFC for LIFE says claim.
Claire Ellis says crease.
And UFC for LIFE says try that.
Gaga Grumps says claim fits. Gaga Grumps says yellow A and I in need of a home.
Lexi Iriaby says pains.
And UFC for LIFE says plural can't do it.
Gaga Grumps says no plurals.
NUFC for LIFE says rained.
NUFC for LIFE says NVM.
Gaga Grumps says that's 6.
Lexi Iriaby says abide.
Claire Ellis says guide.
Gaga Grumps says abide fits.
Claire Ellis says no tea, ignore me.
Gaga Grumps says I lives at number 3 and E at 5. A needs a home.
Hopic says wave.
Claire Ellis says vein.
Gaga Grumps says wave fits. Hope BTC says naive.
Claire Ellis says naive.
NUFC for LIFE says naive.
Gaga Grumps says only one word it can be. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Welcome, Gremlins, to the Game Grotto. Welcome, Gremlins, to the Game Grotto. Welcome in, guys.
Gaga Grumps says welcome Gremlins to the Game Grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to play.
Tap that screen, yeah, tap it. It's your warm-up routine.
And UFC for Life says at Gaga and Grumps, I have to go to my thing. See you soon, bye.
Game Gremlins on the scene. Game Gremlins on the scene. Game Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says have fun NUFC.
Now tap that screen.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
Tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Game Gremlins coming.
NUFC for Life says
Now
thanks.
tap that screen. Tap it. Tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow.
Grumps says at UFC for Life have a good evening.
Game Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. E. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thumb, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts be flying, like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with E, please Grumps.
Grumps says equal.
Gaga Grumps says equal you got. Gaga Grumps says a yellow A and L in need of homes.
Hopek says plant.
Gaga Grumps says plant fits. Gaga Grumps says we added a homeless P. Gaga Grumps says Owen in our house. Gaga Grumps says Lappy maybe. Gaga Grumps says oh all the letters in the grid and no fireworks. Hope BTC says apply. Gaga Grumps says apply is up.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the box! Don't let her lose!
Hopek says woohoo.
Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him push yours!
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those governments in the chat.
Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game! Gremlins, let's go! Good game. Game! Gremlins, let's go! Team Gaga, 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 Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you
Gaga Grumps says Gravy Day half while I set up the next board.
Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grumps says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says Q at last.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. A.
Hopex says antic.
Gaga Grumps says well done, Hope.
Grumps says boo.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Hopex says
Race to the top like a thon. Tap and don't stop like a thon. Who will
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with a please, Hope.
Hopex says I like antic.
Gaga Grumps says oh yes, antic you got.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No
Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
Hopex says G's law.
Lost in the grid, can't figure it out. Oh no.
Hopex says Brooke.
Gaga Grumps says I love wipeouts. 5 letters from the game in one fell swoop. Gaga Grumps says a greeno lives at number 3, AK in need of a home.
Hopek says thinking.
Gaga Grumps says that K is tricky. No C or N to go with it.
Hopek says spoke.
Gaga Grumps says I'm thinking smoky.
Hopek says I like smoky too.
Gaga Grumps says genius.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance night. Explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy
Hopek
place.
says NIIC.
Wordle within 3.
Gaga Grumps says fireworks for hope.
Fireworks for Gaga. Emojis make her happy. As in her face they slappy. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Fireball says Ms. Gaga, do you not speak?
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says I am non-speaking. There is a pinned post on my page explaining. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says Q. I demand AQ.
Hopek says no Q for you lol.
Gaga Grumps says I got you the U. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Grumps says it is an outrage.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a
Gaga
thon?
Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Fingers on fire like
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with U please Grumps.
Grumps says urine.
Gaga Grumps says you taking the pee.
Grumps says indeedy.
Gaga Grumps says Wheel chose the correct starter.
Hopex says usual.
Gaga Grumps says will it be usual?
Fireball says I understand. Thank you.
It's a performance and
Grumps says usually not.
explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy place.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
Hopex says let's go.
Grumps says WTF.
HOPB2C says teamwork.
From a single rose to a whole bouquet, anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Good game.
Fireball says nice mustache.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for the hat Fireball. Gaga Grumps says wasn't I pretty?
Fireball says oh yeah.
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says I shall be on the cover of Vogue next month. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fireball says if I give you too many compliments, then Grumps will have it out for me.
Hopex says dang you again.
Gaga Grumps says he will just want compliments of his own.
Fireball says at least it was a vowel.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. U.
Hopex says uncut.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word. Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with U, please hope.
Hopex says let's go uncut, I guess.
Fireball says sorry, I had to do something.
Gaga Grumps says oh yes, my brain really isn't keeping up today, lol.
Leaf Yerking has entered the
Hopex
grotto.
says uncle. Letha Fillicking says yak.
OPTC says roll.
Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
Philippines says poker.
Gaga Grumps says poker fits. Gaga Grumps says nearly a double wipeout. Gaga Grumps says yellow are in need of a home. Gaga Grumps says 9 letters out of the game. Brilliant.
Fireball says rigid. Hopex says grasp.
Gaga Grumps says rigid fits. Gaga Grumps says and I live at 1 and 2 Wordle Street.
Fireball says HMMM.
Gaga Grumps says tricky one.
Fireball says I'm not that good at this game.
Fireball says though I love it.
Hopet says rival.
Gaga Grumps says rival works.
Fireball says rival is good.
Gaga Grumps says and 6 p.m. snuck up on me.
Fireball says noise.
Gaga Grumps says that's the last one of the day.
Fireball says it's 1 p.m. here.
Fireball says it snuck up on me, though.
Hopek says good day.
Gaga Grumps says are you American or Canadian?
Fireball says okay, sounds good, have a good evening.
Gaga Grumps says thanks.
Fireball says yes, mom and sir.